Alright, welcome to today's lesson on ethics. So what is ethics? Ethics is basically how an individual determines what is good or what is right in a particular situation. And each situation could provide a variety of difficult ethical viewpoints. So what is viewed to be right for one person might be considered to be ethically incorrect for somebody else. The other thing we know about ethics is that a particular individual tends to hold to the same ethical beliefs throughout their entire lifespan. Now there's four basic viewpoints as to how to approach an ethical situation, or four basic ethical behaviors. The first view is we call the justice view. People who hold to this particular viewpoint of the ethics believe that decisions should be made based on rules and standards that are applied impartially and fairly to everybody. So everybody is going to be treated in exactly the same way, no matter the circumstances. In the business world, an example of this would be in the hiring process, ensuring that we're hiring everybody according to the exact same rules, regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, and so on. The second viewpoint we have is the utilitarian view. People who believe this particular ethical viewpoint believe that decisions should be made with the goal of achieving the greatest good for the greatest number of people we can. So an example here in the business world would be that decision to decide whether or not to downsize. If I was going to downsize, that would be terrible for the 30 people who lose their jobs, but the organization as a whole will benefit and become more profitable. The third viewpoint we have is the moral rights view. This is the idea that decisions should be based on the fundamental human rights, or life, liberty, and fair treatment of all people. So in the business world, I might make a decision to not monitor the computer usage habits of my particular employees because I believe that every employee or every person should have a right to privacy. The fourth view that we could have is the individualism view, and this is that the primary concern or impact of a decision should be what impact it has on your own personal long-term consequences. So again, in the business world, I might make a decision to not lie in order to close a deal. While that would be short term great because I've closed the deal, in the long term, that deal may become exposed and my overall reputation would go down and lead to overall consequences. So you can compare these theories with each other. There are some similarities and some differences. You notice that the two theories on the top here tend to be more individual focused. So the moral rights, I'm focusing on the rights of each individual. In an individualism approach, I'm focusing on my own benefits. The bottom two are less focused on the individual and more focused on the majority. In justice, I'm focusing on the same rules to apply to everybody, and utilitarian, I'm trying to benefit as many people as possible. You can also organize them from left to right. So the ones on the right can be viewed to be more libertarian. So in other words, the actual rules that apply can change based on the situation, whereas the ones towards the left are more authoritarian, which are based on a set of rules or guidelines that are going to be enforced. So how do these ethical values relate to the law and what is legal? Well, typically or ideally, ethical behavior should be legal in a just and fair society, but that's not always going to be the case. An example we could find would be in the idea of assisted suicide. Assisted suicide is definitely not legal in all countries or all provinces or all states. But however, there are many doctors who believe that it is ethically their job to provide a safe and calming way for a person to end their life should they choose to do so. So that becomes an ethical and legal conflict there. Similarly, legal behavior is not necessarily always going to be ethical. Just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's always ethical. For example, it is perfectly legal for Walmart to hire only part-time employees in the hopes that they no longer have to pay benefits and larger wages and so on. Ethically, that's probably not the best thing to do because they're hiring lots of people and not providing them the means to maintain a healthy lifestyle. There are also cultural effects on an individual or organization's ethical approaches to the way they do business. As organizations become more global, interacting with people and other organizations all over the world, these cultural issues play a bigger role in business today. So there's three viewpoints on how we approach having competing cultural ideals when trying to do business. The first is called cultural relativism, the second is ethical imperialism, and the third is universalism. So let's look at cultural relativism. This is the idea that ethical behavior is determined by the cultural context. In other words, wherever I'm taking care of my business, that is the ethical standards I should be using. Okay, so for example, if a Canadian company decides to go do business in Japan, they should be operating by the ethical standards of the Japanese. So for example, you can see the picture here, we should be trying to bow as opposed to shake hands. Or we need to be accepting of gifts, because in the Japanese culture, it's very common to give gifts to business partners, whereas in North American culture, that can often be seen as a bribe. Ethical imperialism is sort of the opposite of that. So this is the idea that the behavior where your company is based in should be the behavior that your company uses regardless of what country or where they are and what the cultural beliefs are elsewhere. So the idea here would be, for example, if a Canadian company were to create a factory somewhere in Asia, they would not be okay to employ child labor or poor work habits and so on, because even though that's ethically okay in those countries, it's not deemed to be ethically okay in Canada. The final idea here is universalism, and this is the idea that the same ethical standards should be applied absolutely, no matter what, across all cultures in the world. Now, while this would be ideal, it becomes very difficult to employ in fact, because who's going to come up, number one, with what the ideal standards would be? Because all different cultures have different ethical views, as we've already talked about. And who's going to overall govern those particular standards and make sure they're being enforced everywhere? There's no body that can do that. Now, on a smaller scale, we often have ethical dilemmas within the workplace. This occurs when choices offer a potential for benefit, but may be considered unethical. So you want to do it because there's a benefit there, but there's that ethical issue that's holding you back. Unethical behavior in the office is often rationalized by convincing yourself or others of a number of things. The first is that the behavior is not really illegal. So you're going to do it because it's going to offer that benefit. And it's not, yeah, it might not feel right, but it's not illegal, so I think I should be able to do it. The second one is that the behavior is in everyone's best interest. So even though it might not be the right thing to do, well, everyone's going to benefit, so hey, why not? Let's do it. The third one is that you think nobody's going to find out. So if nobody's going to see me do it, hey, whatever, I might as well do it. Even if it is unethical, I'm going to get the benefit. This often happens in business as a result of either unrealistic demands on the employees, so they're forced into this particular situation, or by having an unattentive or inattentive boss who's not paying attention to what's going on. So therefore I think, well, boss doesn't ever pay attention, so I can probably get away with this. The other way that is one of the most common ways that we rationalize using unethical behavior is that we think that the organization will protect you. We think that I'm going to make this particular unethical decision because it's for the benefit of the organization. I'm moving the organization forward as a whole. And hey, if I get caught, I'm only doing it for the company. They're going to protect me. So those decisions and whether a person is likely to make those decisions and use those rationalizations can be influenced by a number of things. Number one, the individual themselves. Is that individual of a certain religious belief? What are their individual views and needs? What kind of influence does their family have on them and the way that their values are and the way that they've been brought up? The second is the organization itself. What is the organization of the company like that they're working for? What is their supervisor like? Are they attentive, inattentive? What kind of policies are in place by the company? Is it clear what is ethical or what is deemed to be unethical? What are the group norms of the people that they're currently working with? And then finally, what is the environment like that they're working in? The laws and regulations of the particular country or area where they are working in. What are the societal norms as a whole? What's the competition like that's causing me to say, oh my goodness, I really got to make sure I do well on this. I got to do whatever I can because I'm going to lose in the competition. So knowing all these things, how can we try and maintain high ethical standards within a company? Well, there's 4 ways. Ethics training, whistleblowing, creating ethical role models, and having a clear code of ethics. So let's look at the first one, ethics training. Ethics training is any kind of structured program that helps participants understand the ethical aspects of decision making. These could be university courses or college courses or having some expert in the field come in to talk to your company and so on. This helps people incorporate high ethical standards into their daily life. It helps them deal with ethical issues under pressure. But it's key to note here that just by going to this training doesn't mean that your employees are always going to act ethically. All this does is help provide them with a set of tools to help them make proper choices in certain situations. The second idea we have are whistleblowers. These are people who make it known that there's issues or ethical violations that are happening within the company. Now this can happen either externally, where I go and tell some sort of governing body of that particular company, or I go to the press to tell them about the ethical issues that are happening, or this can happen internally, where I report it to my supervisor's supervisor or some other board or some group that I can tell that something's happening that shouldn't be happening. External whistleblowing is often heavily penalized by organizations. A lot of companies don't like this because it puts a bad image on their company. Their brand gets heavily damaged by this, which can cause massive issues. So this leads to a significant suppression of whistleblowing. Whistleblowers are often losing their jobs, prevented from moving up in the company, and so on. So a lot of people are very hesitant to whistleblow outside of the company. Even though there are several laws in place to protect those whistleblowers, they are kind of not necessarily common or consistent everywhere you happen to be. Internal whistleblowing is something that is more promoted by companies, but difficult to encourage. There are many barriers preventing people from whistleblowing within the company. One of them would be the strict chain of command. So because I have to report to my boss and only my boss, it's very difficult to go over my boss's head or to find somebody else that I can report issues to. Secondly, there could be a strong group's identity. In this idea, I'm more concerned about how my peers are working, and my peers are going to encourage loyalty to them, and I don't want to go against them. It creates some sort of self-censorship because I want to be loyal to everyone around me. And then the other one is an ambiguous work priority. So it's kind of made unclear by the company what is ethically okay, not okay, hard to tell what's right and wrong. Companies have started to encourage more whistleblowing in their companies by creating what we call an ethics advisory, a group of people that you can go to make an anonymous whistleblowing complaint. So you don't have to fear any of the issues that might be trying to hold you back. We also have ethical role models. This is where the management team, upper management, middle management, and lower management, all try and model proper ethical behavior in the hopes that if I do it, you will follow suit and do the same yourself. In order to do this, managers must do a couple of things. Number one, they must create realistic goals. Okay? If I have excessive pressure on my employees, it's going to cause them to look for ways to try and bend the rules to make sure that they meet those expectations. So if my goals are realistic, I'm less likely to have employees trying to do that. And the second is to model ethical behavior. Again, it's been proven that employees won't do as I say, but not as I do. You have to model it yourself to get employees to buy in. The final one is a code of ethics. This is a written guideline on how to behave in questionable situations. It can cover topics like workforce diversity, bribery, political contributions and how to handle those, how to keep honest records, how to maintain honest and open customer-supplier relationships, and how to maintain confidentiality of employees when they have issues or they have disabilities or so on, information that they don't want out to everybody. The problem here is that companies' personal code of ethics may differ from other companies that they are doing business with, people that they're contracting, and you can have a conflict there when trying to deal with that. That's it. That's all we have for today. We'll see you in class tomorrow where we can practice what we've learned.